is the G1 podcast.
이번 역은 서울역입니다.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to the G1 podcast. This is our first edition of Rock Bottom for 2017. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and I've been waiting for a special occasion, a special story, or something to come along. And now that has fallen into my lap. After a long search, I've been trying to put this topic together for a while. We're talking about the law today. And, first, before I tell you exactly what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to introduce my guest to you. We're going to call him Mr. Moon. That is not his real name. He's a rookie cop, experience level under 5 years. So, Mr. Moon, why don't you say hi?
Hello.
Okay, so you are a cop.
Yes, I am a police officer.
And unlike most of my experiences with police officers, this is chill. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
So you have you're obviously very, very good at English, right? I'm sure some people are curious how that came to be. You want to just give them the really quick 411 on why you're so good at English and why you're willing to talk to me?
Oh, well, Korea is a very English frenzy country. So there's been a lot of private education, back in my days. Also a little bit of living overseas,
Okay, so living overseas, you've also done some police officering overseas a little bit, right? You've gone on some work trips and things like that, so you know how the cops work in different countries, right?
I have a vague idea.
Okay, good. Just so our listeners know that, your experience isn't just limited to Korea. So you've been working for a while, and I wanted to get in touch with you to tell our listeners what happens, quite frankly, when we screw up. And the opportunity to screw up is just so endless. And for me, it's defined by maybe not even doing something that drastic, but just doing something that we're accustomed to getting away with.
Okay.
Or getting a slap on the wrist back in our home country. So, for example, if I got into a bar fight, I might just get thrown in the drunk tank.
Yes.
If it's really bad, I might be charged with assault. But I know exactly what happens. I'm American, by the way. And here, I am scared to death because, as I understand it, there's no self-defense law. There's only mutual assault, but we'll dive into that later.
Okay.
Let's get started with the basics, though. So, the thing that I am most afraid of, essentially, and many of us, please walk us through the process of getting arrested. And I understand that you have gone through tons of investigations or cases of street arrests and things like that, right?
Well, I spent about 6 months in detectives. And my specialty is in violent crimes.
Whoa.
Well, I'm not talking about these like big narcotics case or like mafias. No.
Okay, like assault.
I'm talking about like street fights.
Okay.
During those 6 months, I did about 100 cases, and most of them are fights, property damage, interference with business.
Okay, so I'm sure this is like the more common cases then, and these are also cases in which foreigners, we might find ourselves in, unfortunately,
yes,
right?
Yes, of course. Among the 100 cases, about 80 of them are assaults. This assault is the most common case. And the legal definition of assault is the, I know this is all in Korean because the law is in Korean, but...
you want to give us the name of the law in Korean just in case we have any Korean
We have
listeners?
the criminal law, and under the criminal law, we have a provision called assault. Or in Korean, it's 폭행. What 폭행 means, basically, it doesn't have to involve the damage of your body. That's severe injury, which is another provision under the law. The definition of 폭행 or assault is very wide-ranging. It doesn't necessarily involve touching your body. If I make some sort of an action, like an offensive action towards you, even if it doesn't hit you, that could be considered assault. The law is very complicated, and if I wanted to get into the theories of law, it would take too long.
So we don't have to do that, but let's get to an example of what would be, since you've seen over 80 of these investigations, on the lighter end, what has been considered assault? Like simply something
simply pushing.
Like pushing, okay.
Pushing, because you're touching somebody else's body.
Yes.
Against their will.
Yeah.
Which means...
I would agree with that definition, actually.
Yeah, so you're violating their right to be free.
Yeah. But something non-physical, like if I just gave you the finger, like really close.
That's not assault.
Okay.
That I don't think that could even qualify as insultation.
Okay.
Which is also a crime.
Okay. So I could, in theory, be walking around middle fingers ablaze and...
Oh, you're going to get complaints.
Yeah.
And the cops are going to show up and they're going to say like...
You're going to get complaints. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
They're going to be like, dude.
I save my middle finger for special occasions.
Yes.
Mr. Moon. Okay, so pretty much being touched without consent is considered assault. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what happens if you get arrested for something similar to that, or you get complaints, cops come up to you?
First of all, when you get into a fight or any kind of skirmish, the police is going to show up from a patrol unit. The patrol unit is going to show up and they're going to decide whether they're going to arrest you as a flagrant offender or whether they're going to have you in on a voluntary attendance. That really depends. There is really no straight answer, which is the most difficult part of policing. But anyways,
it's a discretion call.
Yeah. And you have to exercise discretion well, otherwise the police officer is gonna have to
you get complaints and things like that.
They're gonna have to take the responsibility. Anyways, once you get arrested, you're gonna be escorted to a nearby police box or a precinct, and they're gonna do simple paperwork. And those paperworks will involve drafting a arrest report, your Miranda rights confirmation.
Are those Miranda rights very similar to what they are in the West?
Yes.
The right to remain silent.
There are some differences. The Miranda rights for when you get arrested and the Miranda rights when you're being interrogated as an accused is different. So when you get arrested, they're going to, first of all, they have to know why you're being arrested, for what you're being arrested.
So the person being arrested is informed of why they're being arrested.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll just do like a little demo. So GP, you're being arrested for assault. I'm gonna say, Mr. GP, you're being arrested as a flagrant offender of an assault. You have the right to a lawyer. You have the right to file for a judicial review of this arrest.
And could you do that in Korean just so that our listeners kind of have a feel for what that sounds like?
당신을 폭행의 현행범으로 체포합니다. 변호사를 선임할 수 있고 체포구속 적부심을 청구할 권리가 있습니다. 변명을 할 기회가 있습니다.
Oh my gosh, I got the chills and I hope I never hear that again. Okay. You said there were two different types of bookings. One was voluntary
attendance.
And what does that mean?
Voluntary attendance is when there's an allegation, but when the person is not a flagrant offender. Flagrant offender under the criminal procedure law means either you are caught in the act or right after the act.
So it's super obvious. It's flagrant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Miranda rights. You moved on to paperwork. What if you don't understand Korean? I speak Korean enough to go to the post office, not enough to deal with legal situations like this.
Okay, so when you get to the police station, when you get to the precinct or a police box, they're going to have you sign some papers. The person who's arrested will probably be requested to sign two papers. One of them will be a confirmation of the Miranda rights, which is basically a piece of paper that says that the Miranda rights have been read to you and that you've heard the Miranda rights. You can refuse to sign this piece of paper, but that's not going to have any legal meaning. Officers just write down, refused.
Okay.
And they're going to have you sign another paper, which is, I don't know how to say this in English, but it's like it's a piece of paper that confirms the state of your body. So we need to check where you've been hurt. This is to make sure that there is absolutely no confusion about any kind of bodily injury. Because at times, when we arrive at the scene, the person who's being arrested is already injured. And then we arrest and we handcuff them. Later, they're gonna argue that the police officer assaulted the person in the process, but that's not true. So in order to avoid confusions about those things, we get them to sign that, okay, this is how you were,
when we got you.
When we got you.
I like that. Hopefully that's not taken advantage of by any party. Mm-hmm. If you're being arrested and you're a flagrant offender, how long can you be detained before you're actually formally charged?
48 hours.
48 hours.
And during those 48 hours, there needs to be Either the police needs to file for a warrant. Well, see, again, there's a bit of a legal imprecision in that. The police does not have the right to file for warrants. So what we need to do is we need to request the prosecutor to file for a warrant to the court.
Right.
So we need to make that request within 48 hours.
Okay, so as long as that request is being made within 48 hours.
Yeah. We can hold you for 48 hours.
Okay. And if you don't get that, then you're just free to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have the right to an attorney? And if you do, like I'm sure you do, right? But what if you can't afford one?
Usually if you're talking about fights.
Does it go that far, or do people just plead guilty?
No, if you're talking about a bar fight and you're saying I want my lawyer here, I mean, okay, sure, you can bring a lawyer. If you're like this rich dude, okay, sure, you can have your lawyer. But for average people, would you really want to hire a lawyer for? I mean, you don't really need a lawyer for bar fights. You have the right to do that, and sure, you're welcome to bring your lawyer, but nobody really does that.
And what if you want a lawyer?
What if
like you're just being really difficult? You want a lawyer, you can't afford one. Because that is a possibility if you're.
There are state appointed lawyers.
Okay.
There are state appointed lawyers. And in some cases, in cases that's specified under the law, you have to have one. It's not a choice.
Oh, really? You can't even get a lawyer of your own choosing. It has to be a state appointed?
No.
Oh, okay, no.
But you have to have some sort of legal counsel.
I get it. Thank you for clarifying that. What's the likelihood that lawyer is going to speak English?
I don't know, really.
Okay.
I don't work in that industry, so I don't know how many people. But if you're worried about the language barrier when you're at a police station, that language barrier is just as challenging for you as it is for police officers. What police officers do is that we have a pool of civilian translators who live in the district, and we rely on their assistance. Legally, even if a police officer does speak English, this is also important. Even legally, even if a police officer does speak English, the police officer is not allowed to interrogate the person in a foreign language. You need to have a go-between. You need to have a civilian there. That is to ensure the integrity of the interrogation report, to make sure that law enforcement is not distorting the testimony that's given by the accused.
So I'm seeing a lot more links in this chain than I initially thought. Mm-hmm. And that could be good, that could be bad. I've never been arrested, so I don't know all the minutia here and there. It creates a situation in which if you were arresting me,
yes,
and I know full well, like now I know how good you are at English, but you could understand everything I'm saying.
Yeah.
You cannot speak to me in English.
No.
Now, could you report the things you overheard me saying, since we do have the right to remain silent?
Yes.
And if I'm speaking in English and you understand English, I've obviously waived that right. Could you report my speech in English to a third party during trial?
That's tricky. That would really depend on the case specifically and individually.
Okay, but don't say anything stupid, obviously.
But yeah, what the police officer can do is they can write a separate report on what the person has said. For instance, let's say that in the process of interrogation, I understand English, but I can't interrogate you in English. I have to go through the translator.
Yeah, you have to do the paperwork process.
But I can hear you, let's say, like swearing at me, and I hear that. I can make a separate note. We're going to take record of that, and we're going to make sure that the prosecutor and the judge sees it. One actual example, when I was a detective in a city in the outskirts of Seoul, there was a guy who came in, I think around 1 a.m.
He came in, or he was arrested?
He was arrested.
Okay.
On assault charges. From 1, he was loud, no exaggeration whatsoever. He swore at us incessantly without stopping for 1 second. I'm not exaggerating, really, for 3 hours. So from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. he swore at us. Now from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. is when we kind of like try to get a little bit of sleep, in our chairs.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we have to do that, otherwise, so we can take another case.
In the morning.
This guy comes just yelling at us for 3 hours. Usually, if you come in an assault charge, you're given fine.
What's the fine generally like?
Imprisonment not exceeding 2 years, or was it or an and?
Is it likely to be imprisoned at all for a like?
No.
Okay.
If you're imprisoned on an assault, that means you probably have like a bunch of priors.
Okay.
I think that's the only way. Or you
You like seriously jeopardize someone's life, perhaps?
that would be filed under another provision.
Okay.
That would be another crime.
Like attempted murder or something?
Yes, or
I'm sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
it's Article 263.
You just have like a thing on your phone with like police provisions? Or are you just neighboring?
The law.
Okay.
There's an app for that.
It's called the law.
Yeah.
Download the app.
Oh, it's 260. See, it's imprisonment not exceeding 2 years or fine not exceeding 5 million won.
So not exceeding $5,000.
Yeah.
I'm sure the average is much, much lower.
Yeah. So usually it's much, much lower. But this guy who swore at us incessantly, I wrote, like blah blah blah. This person came in around 1 a.m. on an assault charge, was constantly disrespectful, and spewing out profanity to police officers. And the guy got, I think he got 1 year of imprisonment. I think he got out on it's called 집행유예 in Korean. So the execution of your sentence is reserved.
Okay, so it's commuted, or it's stayed off for later. It's deferred, essentially. Okay.
Yeah. For a period of I think 1 year and 6 months. That's pretty heavy for a simple assault.
Okay, so after that 1 year and 6 months, he has to then go to prison?
No, after those 1 year and 6 months.
It's a probation?
Yeah, it's kind of like a probation. Yes,
it's a probation. Okay.
But probation, kind of like probation. I'm not sure if that's the precise legal jargon for that.
Yeah, and I'm sure their nuances are very different between Korea and the states where I'm from.
That's very heavy.
Yeah.
So I think one tip to remember is please be respectful to police officers. Otherwise, they're going to take note of that.
Yeah, and it's so easy to forget that because a lot of times these stories go around of, oh yeah, I was walking down the street and I saw some older gentleman disrespecting a police officer to their face, or like slapping them or whatever, and the police officer seemed so powerless, right? Don't let those stories encourage you. You weren't there for what happened afterwards. No. So let's move on. Let's say, in what circumstances would you generally go to face a trial? If not for assault, then what kind of crimes would you face trial for? Like, are there any, as far as you know, labor laws that you could face trial for, or drug crimes?
Well, the labor, because you mentioned it, labor law is enforced not by the police, but it's mainly enforced by the labor department. Narcotics law, yes, you'll face trial because it's a major crime. If we're talking about things like assault, you can avoid facing a trial in case of an assault. There are a couple of crimes in the law where you can come to an agreement with the other party, and assault is one of them. I think injury by negligence is also one of them.
Where you can face trial, or where you can settle outside, or both.
You need to come to an agreement before the end of your first level trial.
Okay.
Before appealing.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you go to a trial, let's say it's a drug possession charge.
Okay.
Is that generally just you and the judge and your representation and the prosecutor, or is there also a jury?
Oh, jury's another thing. That's a whole different story.
Your body language changed there very drastically. So what would a jury entail?
It would entail
like a huge crime, like we're talking murder, or
no. First, the accused have to request it.
Okay.
And you have to be charged with, I think, if I remember correctly, I think it needs to be a crime where the minimum penalty is 1 year or above.
Okay, so it could be a drug charge.
I'm sorry, it's either 1 or 3. It's very confusing because you have like 1 year, 3 year for different provisions, and it's very confusing.
And you're a police officer. You're not part of that upper judicial system, right? You're not part of that.
No, but it does come up on our test, and when we get promoted and stuff. So I shouldn't.
You should know.
I should know, but I got to look through the book. It's either 1 or 3.
Okay. So you actually have to request it, and it's a jury of your peers, so it'd be a jury of citizens?
Yes, citizens.
Okay. What is the timeline or the procedure for, let's say, a drug charge? Because, people who are on vacation,
yes,
or people who only want to teach or take a working holiday for a year. You know, these are the kind of recreational activities that may be decriminalized in countries that they're from, but not so in Korea. So let's say you get busted. What is the timeline looking like? The first night you get arrested, then the second night, and then so on and so forth, 3 months down the line. When is your trial, et cetera, et cetera?
Usually, if you're talking about drug charge, the maximum for investigation, about 30 days is investigation. Because if you're, it really depends. And I don't know how to give you like a straight response to that. But that, when I say 30 days, is when you're arrested as a flagrant offender, you have the 48 hours. Within those 48 hours, either you have to file for a warrant for your confinement, and a confinement is a different legal terminology. So arrest, you can hold the person for 48 hours, but confinement is 10 days. You have to file for a warrant for confinement. If the warrant is issued, then the police can hold you for 10 days, by the end of which your custody needs to be transferred to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office, if they get another warrant for your confinement, can hold you up to 20 days. 10 days, and then they'll have to refile for another 10 days if they need additional time.
Okay, and does that endlessly go on? They can keep refiling? Or
No.
You have to move on, right?
Yeah, you have to move on. You can refile just once.
Okay.
30 days. If you're talking about, but the exceptions also, if you're talking about crimes related to national security, it's a little different. But let's not go there because that's very uncommon.
Very unlikely.
Yeah. Total investigation about 30 days. If you go into trial, and if we're not talking about summary trials or anything like that, if you go into like an actual formal trial, it can last up till 18 months. 18 months, and when I say 18 months, it can last more than 18 months. It can go on forever. But your confinement during the trials could go up to 18 months. But trials can go on.
Okay, so you could get out on bail then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or if your confinement warrant expires, then you can get out.
Okay.
But then again, a lot of technicalities.
But the trial is still something you still have to stand for whenever that date is.
But then again, if we're talking about assaults, which is like the most likely crime that you're going to run into,
you don't really have to worry about any of this.
Most likely you get like a summary trial. Summary trial means basically you're going to go through trial with mails. So you're going to get like a bunch of documents through mail. You have to write them out and you send it back to the court. The court will read what you wrote, and then they're going to sentence, and they can send the mail back to you. And so it's like, there's no hearing.
Send your check, essentially.
Exactly.
Or make the direct deposit to this.
You never have to
bank account.
Yeah, you don't meet the judge.
Wow, that is really efficient and convenient. But also,
but if you feel like that you want a formal trial, then you can file for a formal trial. Very complicated, the legal system in Korea.
Yeah, I'm saying that this is convenient for like someone like myself who doesn't really want to deal with it. But of course, I'm a foreigner. We'll get into that a bit later. But I'm also worried that if you don't ever actually have to deal with an attorney or a prosecutor, you don't ever have to see a judge, that the gravity of what you did doesn't ever really sink in, and that plays into a role of repeat offenses.
See, in Korea, the police used to be feared.
Yeah, during the dictatorship.
Yes. So the mere fact that you were involved in a police business is just kind of frightening. Most people don't want to have anything to do with the police. So I think it's deterrent enough.
Do you think that atmosphere of police-related business still holds true today?
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who say that people treat police really badly in Korea. Like you said, there's like an old guy slapping like a police officer in the face, and that makes the police appear powerless. On the other hand, there are also a segment of our society that thinks that the police is very powerful.
Probably the ones that remember the dictatorship a little bit better than younger people.
Yeah.
While we're on that topic, this still is a podcast, and we like to provide a few little anecdotes here or there. Have you ever been disrespected in such a manner?
I've been spat in the face.
Okay. Under what context? Give us the story.
I was again, a detective story. This guy came in around, I think about around 8, I think.
AM or PM?
AM. And it was almost the end of our shift. And this guy, although we watched him, his case wasn't our case because it was past a certain time, and we were ready to go home. We were just keeping an eye on him before the next next shift came in to investigate the guy.
Yeah, and it's no longer your responsibility.
No. So, but then this guy resisted. He was in handcuffs, and when we were trying to settle him down, he like sprayed, like, you know, like
Like a child?
like a child.
Yeah,
Yes, like
yeah.
to not just me, to a couple of other officers. So we had him down, and I had like this saliva goo on my face, on my right cheek. I was like, ew, you know, like, oh, you know, but it was okay. Like, it's part of the job. So I went, I washed, and I went home. I slept because I had a night duty. I woke up in the afternoon to find multiple text messages in my phone suggesting the guy was a tuberculosis patient.
Okay.
Tuberculosis is a contagious disease.
Yeah.
And
Maybe that's why he did that.
yeah, and apparently we heard from the case investigator that he was aware of the fact that he had tuberculosis. So they wanted everybody to get checked up. It came out negative, so
Thank goodness.
I was very fortunate, but you know, that was a
Everybody came out negative?
everybody came out negative.
Good.
Yeah.
So you kind of miss people's mouths. Okay, that's quite a story.
Yeah.
Thank goodness that's as far as it's gone for you. Let's get back to the topic at hand here. It's all right if you don't have an answer to this one or any of these questions, but in what situations is a foreign offender generally deported?
Again, that's a difficult question. I don't think I'll be able to. I'm not an authority to provide an answer because usually the question of deportation is dealt with by the immigration office.
Okay.
And I am not the immigration. But usually when we deport somebody, usually they have expired their visa status.
Okay, and their right to be in the country no longer applies anyway.
Yes.
That seems obvious, right?
Yes. Or your activity in Korea does not necessarily correspond to the visa.
Okay.
Those are the two main cases. If you commit crime, it's really up to the immigration. So I really don't know.
Do you find that it's very, very case by case, or do you find that they generally like to try you and keep you in Korea? Do you find that they generally like to hand you off to your own country and have them deal with you?
I really don't know. That's really an immigration problem.
Okay.
So
Well, hopefully if any of our listeners out there know any immigration officers, we definitely have some questions to ask. Okay, so this one is kind of a softer crime, but it is one that we worry about as foreigners, and Koreans do as well. You can see it in media. Mm-hmm. When I was working in radio, we were prevented from saying almost any company name on broadcast. Mm-hmm. And when you read it in news, it's always a man with the surname Kim, mm-hmm. or a woman with the surname Che, right? They're very, very worried about slander laws. Mm-hmm. Even if you're found guilty of a crime,
yes,
these protections are... they're still afforded to you. What is considered slander and libel in Korea? How commonly are people actually charged with this?
Libel is dealt in the fraud unit in Korea. I don't know why.
Okay.
I think it's because the legal interest that's being protected by this provision in the criminal law is credit of a person. That's why they do it in the economics team.
Reputation,
yes,
right?
Reputation, credit. What is considered slander? For instance, if I call you, like, if I swear at you, if I say like, oh, you whatever, that's called insultation. But that's it's just profanity. But there's another provision. In Korean, it's called 명예훼손. It's basically meaning disreputing somebody. Disreputation is another crime, and the mode of crime is
so, for example, via the internet or
via
some sort of like radio broadcast or things like that.
Yeah.
Or this podcast, if you decided to put someone on blast right now, right?
Yeah. It needs to be established that there is possibility of this being spread. In Korean, in legal Korean term, it's called 공연성, which means that it has to be done in open space where there is possibility of dissemination.
So, for example, just let me rewind for our listeners who aren't familiar with slander and libel. Slander is the false spoken statements that damage someone's reputation, and libel is that same thing, but the written form of it, right? I'm actually not quite sure what broadcast falls into. I'm sure it's slander, though, because it's spoken, right?
I have to correct you there. You said false statement, but in Korea, libel can be done with true statements as well.
Oh, this is the thing that is the sharp divide for foreigners, especially Western foreigners, right? Because if it's true, then it's no longer slander or libel. Generally speaking, it's just true.
Even if it's true, if this tarnishes the reputation of another person, then, and if you make it publicly,
It's damaging to their business or their reputation. You're liable for damages.
Right. Of course, this will have to be contested in court or at the police. There's so many interpretations, and they're all very different. Again, the Korean law allows for all kinds of interpretations. There is no straight answer for that. And that interpretation is the responsibility of our judiciary branch, which is why it's so important to have an impartial judiciary, just like it is in any other country. But I think especially in Korea, because of our legal system, which is based in the European civil law system.
So it seems like people are somewhat like, I guess there's no answer to how commonly people are charged with this. That's not as important as what the penalties generally are.
The penalty.
Yeah.
Let me read you.
He's taken out a Korean law book. It's filled with a red and green highlighter.
For libel.
Libel and or slander.
For libel, imprisonment not exceeding 2 years, or fine not exceeding 5 million won.
Okay.
That's libel through true statement.
Okay.
Through false statement.
I'm sure it should be a bit harsher, right?
Yeah, it's a little harsher. Imprisonment not exceeding 5 years, or suspension of license under 10 years, and fine not exceeding 10 million won.
Okay.
So it's harsher. You also have, there's another provision called libel through publication. Imprisonment not exceeding 3 years, or fine not exceeding 7 million won. Insultation or slander, as you put it. Slander is very light. For instance, if you say something, screw you.
Yeah.
Imprisonment not exceeding 1 year, and fine not exceeding 2 million won.
Okay, but if I was just insulting someone,
Right.
that doesn't really damage their reputation, just their ego, right?
Right.
So I'm kind of surprised that that's covered there.
Right.
Well, let's move on. Drug possession, first of all, and I want to hear about distribution. What kind of penalties can we expect if you're found?
Drug charges.
Yeah.
There are a couple of drug provisions in the criminal law, and that is the law that the police officers usually study. But we also have special laws, because the criminal law is old, and also it just lays out like the basic penalties. You also have these special laws, and you'll have to know like the special laws. Special laws are usually the domains of investigators who specialize in that area, and I'm not a narc investigator, so I'm not too sure of the exact charges, but they are considered to be serious crimes.
I understand that it's in any amount that you will be given time, but that's just what I understand from other people's stories. Now, perhaps you would know, does the Korean law enforcement system, does it discriminate between different substances? Because in the West, there's a huge difference between being found in the possession of marijuana as opposed to heroin.
Again, you need some extensive experience in narcotics investigation, which is something that I don't have.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have the answer to your question.
What you can answer me though is just as a Korean speaker, when I hear people talk about drugs, they always just say mayak. And is that just a blanket term for drugs, or does that specifically refer to, a certain type of drug?
For average Koreans, mayak is all kinds of drugs.
And I find that similarly, there's not a huge differentiation between drug types when I'm discussing with a Korean person. A layman, they're just like, a drug is a drug, and they're not familiar with the, various side effects, intensities, potency, addiction, and things like that. Do you find that Koreans kind of generally approach it that way? Like they just think a drug is a drug?
I think Koreans are not as... Drug is a very foreign concept for Koreans. It's becoming less foreign nowadays. But drug still is a very foreign concept to, I think, most Koreans. They don't know much about it. They don't want to be involved in it. So when people refer to something as mayak, it's drug. It's just drug is drug. Whether it's marijuana or whether it's methamphetamine, it's, it is what it is.
Okay. What about petty theft? Small things, not like cars, but like possessions. You steal something. What's the general penalty there?
For theft, it's imprisonment under 6 years, or fine not exceeding 10 million won.
And obviously that goes up with the severity of the theft if you're
Yes.
stealing someone's.
Or sometimes the prosecutor can just like let you off the hook.
Really?
Yeah. That's why the prosecutors are so influential, because they can let you off the hook. They can reserve indictment. It's called 기소유예.
And why would they ever do that? Unless
Okay,
you were like,
I'll give you examples. I'll give you two examples. You know how there are old people who pick up like scrap metals and like papers?
yeah, common sight.
Right. There was one such person. He was very old, very poor, and he was picking up stuff. And he picked up some scrap metal in front of a store without checking who owned it. After he picked it up, he just moved on. The owner of the store filed a police report saying this person took scrap metals, and it was just the CCTV was just like HD, like high resolution, like it was
clearly him.
It was clearly the guy. When we brought him in, and I asked, the first thing when we interrogate you is that we ask about you, who you are, what kind of money you make, not so because we can judge him by his level of wealth, but we need to know, because if this is an extremely poor person, if this is an extremely underprivileged person, this is something that can work in favor of the accused. So this guy, he was extremely poor, but it was clear what he did. So I had to give the prosecutor's office an opinion of indictment, which is basically saying that this person needs to be prosecuted because he did what he did. But at the same time, the prosecutor is going to take note of the fact that he's a very poor person, and his intent is not so bad. Although he was aware of the fact that this could belong to someone else.
It wasn't malicious.
Yeah, it wasn't like, morally it wasn't malicious.
Yeah.
It was, so reserve of indictment.
Okay.
Yeah. Another case, there was a theft inside a Baskin-Robbins of a wallet. So this person went to Baskin-Robbins. This woman went to Baskin-Robbins with her son, had some ice cream, but she dropped her wallet in the Baskin-Robbins, somewhere.
Yeah.
And then there was this young couple, a guy and a girl, who came into the Baskin-Robbins. They had some ice creams, and as they were going out, the guy, the boyfriend, saw the wallet on the floor, and he picked it up, and he took it with him.
Okay.
And he went to the closest bathroom there was. He went into the stall. He took only the cash out, and he just dumped the rest into the trash can. Someone found that, and also the victim filed a police report. How we tracked the guy down is that the girl paid for the ice cream. When she paid for it, she entered her dad's phone number on the tax receipt. So we got the receipt, and we filed a search warrant to the tax office, which led to the father of the girlfriend. And then we asked the father, "Were you here at this time?" And he was like, "No." Like, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, okay, but do you have daughters in any case?" "Yes, I have 2 daughters." "Can you please ask your daughters if they were with this guy at this time?" So we were able to track this guy down. He came in. We pulled out his priors. No prior. He was a first time offender, so he let him off the hook. But I think on a side note, if I called his girlfriend's dad about him being a thief, think about the backlash. I think that was punishing enough for him. I'm not sure. I wonder if they're still together.
Let us know if you're listening in. All right. Okay. Pretty small examples there.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's good to know. Don't bank on that if you're planning on stealing anything.
Yeah.
Obviously. Let's move on to, of course, we keep making our way back to this street fight example because of how common it is. Also, like a little story of my own. I was walking down HBC, Haebangchon, and a car, because if you're familiar with HBC, there's no sidewalks walking
They
out.
call it HBC?
Yeah, we call it HBC.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, HBC.
Every time I say it, Koreans are like, "Oh, you foreigners are clever." So I'm walking down. There's no sidewalks. Cars are parked on the side of the road. It's very hard to make your way down the main strip. And this car starts swerving, or like not drastically swerving, because it kind of starts steering towards me. Mm-hmm. And I jump out of the way, and I give the guy the finger. And this is when things started getting heated. Like, he got out of his car, as I was probably maybe 10 meters away. I was kind of surprised he got out of his car, right? And then I was like, oh, okay, this could be bad. And I know that it's not bad because as soon as he gets out of his car, you hear this. He's cracking his knuckles like some sort of after school special with the bully coming out. And I was like, okay, this guy's not going to do anything. And he starts like giving me the finger and yelling at me and kind of like grabbing my clothes.
He grabbed your clothes.
Yeah,
that's assault.
That is assault. And
I should call the cops.
I wish that I had, some photographic evidence at the time, but it's been a while since that occurred. Nothing happened, and I was more afraid of like not what he would do to me, but what like I would do to him. Because there's a lot of time to think if you're me, because you've seen this play out. Your friends tell you about it, and he's just like will not stop, like kind of like pushing my head and like grabbing my clothes, but he's not actually hurting me. He's just really annoying me.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man, where I'm from, the second you touch me, I know exactly what my rights are, and I would have gotten dirty. I would not be fighting to engage with you. I'd be fighting to end, right? And of course I didn't do that. I just was like, okay, dude, you win. You want to win? You win, right? If you're gonna hit me, do it. But if you're not, I'm gonna go. And eventually, like he actually gets racial with me. Not to play into any stereotypes or anything, but he asked me if I'm American, and I tell him, what does that matter?
Okay.
I speak English.
Okay.
He doesn't really speak English. And I was sad to see it go that way because I was like, why does it always boil down? And he started telling me to speak Korean. And I was like, you know what? If someone's going to have trouble communicating in this situation, it's going to be you, not me.
Okay.
Because I know exactly what you're saying. So I kind of leave it. But I always kind of wonder, I flash back, and that does play into my mind whenever I think of flipping anyone off again. So I try not to do that. Lesson learned.
Yes.
Right? But I understand that there's not really a self-defense law here.
There is a self-defense law.
Okay.
Article 21 of the criminal law, if I remember correctly. However, the court interprets it very narrowly. So there are these very strict requirements for the action to be considered eligible. Also, if you're talking about assault, there is no. So you're right, I guess, in a way. There is no self-defense law when it comes to assault, which is why if you're ever involved in a physical conflict with somebody, don't fight back. If you fight back, you're also, both of you are going to be accused, and both of you are going to be charged. Don't fight back.
What is that narrow interpretation that you mentioned?
There needs to be like a situation where there's no other way or means to. It's a complicated.
So for me, I literally just walked away. I didn't touch him. I could have reported him.
For instance, if he touched you and if he grabbed your clothes, that's assault.
Yeah.
If you just kind of like fling him back, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about when you get into fights, people usually like punch each other in the face.
Yeah.
Just because you were punched, don't punch the guy back is what I'm trying to say.
So, and most of these situations, there's obviously a way out. The way out is to leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's the best.
Okay. So there we go. It would have been mutual assault if I had chosen to try to defend myself. So that's a huge distinction. Most foreigners are aware of that, who've been here a while, but some aren't. And those penalties you mentioned earlier, confinement less than how many years?
2 years.
Less than 2 years, fine up to 5 million won?
Yes.
Okay.
For assault. Again, the definition of self-defense is very, very different in Korea. So I advise anyone who's coming to Korea from a foreign country to not to take that interpretation to yourself. I mean, don't fight back, really. It's so much easier to be the victim than to be the accused.
In my case, I could have if I had like some sort of evidence or chosen to report him, he'd be on CCTV and all that.
Yes.
And I would have been simply the victim.
Right. Because even if you're both the accused in an assault case, I mean, you can come to an agreement and you can make it go away. But I think you would have to leverage if you're the victim and that person's the accused. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's much more one-sided. Yeah. So these penalties, let's assume that we both fought, right? Him and I. Would we have faced the same exact penalties?
No, that's really up to the judge.
Okay, so if he had like beaten the snot out of me and I might have pushed him or like slapped him across the face, but after that it was a one-sided fight, then he might get a much more severe punishment than me.
I would suppose so.
Okay. And I suppose that only gets more complicated with visa issues, not being a Korean citizen, things like that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is correct. Again, because this is an immigration problem. But when I worked, I heard that if you are sentenced with a fine of 4 million won or above, then it's very unlikely that your visa is going to be renewed.
Okay, so anything less than that, you still have a shot.
Yeah.
Okay, I wouldn't bank on that either,
Yeah.
obviously. That's good to know. I was going to ask you that a little bit later. Let's say imprisonment is a likelihood.
Mm-hmm.
You ever been to a Korean prison? I'm sure you have, right?
Once, when I was in detectives, my partner wanted to go there to ask a couple of questions to a person who was being held there.
Okay.
But we also have detention cells in the police station. I've been there
Of course.
a million times.
Are foreigners kept separate in detention cells in police stations?
Yes, there is a separate. It's gonna say 외국인 on the. Yeah, it's no really.
Yeah, okay.
외국인실. That's where the foreigners are kept.
Okay. And they have all the same rights as Koreans in terms of like meals and things like that, right?
Of course.
Okay. And in prisons, they're also detained separately. I heard that it's an entirely different prison for foreign offenders.
Yes, there is one in Cheonan, and I think there are like foreigners ward in other. But then again, I'm not too sure about that. It falls under corrections, so.
Okay. I would be curious to know what the logic is for separating Korean offenders and foreign offenders. Is it for protection or whatnot? If you know.
Okay, well, again, I can't speak for the corrections bureau, but from what I know, it's to meet the global standard in the treatment of prisoners and to avoid diplomatic incidents or consular incidents with regards to the conditions at which foreign nationals are kept in our correctional facilities.
If that is indeed true,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying it is or isn't, but that could mean that Korean offenders are kept in facilities or given less than foreign nationals are, theoretically.
Theoretically.
Okay. Of course, we don't know that, but if one of our listeners knows or has an opinion, hit me up in the comments. We would love to hear it. All right. We got a few closing questions for you.
Just an additional note, because we were talking about like detention and confinement. This isn't very common yet, but you know how you said there's a separate room for foreigners. There's a separate room for females and separate room for foreigners. So we had this one case.
Is there a separate room for female foreigners?
See, that again, that's the big question. But the real conundrum is, what if you get a foreign national who is a transgender in detention? Where do you put the person?
Not unheard of.
Yeah,
Not unheard of in Itaewon.
I was very close to this officer. I had a friend who worked detention, and she once told me that there was somebody, a Thai national, transgender, who was busted on a prostitution charges, and she was brought in the middle of the night, and she was asked to be frisked by a female officer, but she had
male genitalia.
Yes.
Okay.
So the big question is, who frisks her? Should we see her as male or female? After the frisking is done, should we put her in the foreigner's room or in the male's room or in the female's room? Because she qualifies for all these three rooms. And this is and I actually wrote a report about this, which was just blatantly ignored by the chain of command. But you felt like it was something that needed to be addressed. Yeah,
Okay.
Not yet, but in the future, if we were so concerned about global standards, we need to address questions, LGBT questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and law enforcement. Where do you put this person? Who frisks this person? Because for the person who came in, it may be he or she, I don't even know. The person may think that it's her or his or her human rights to be frisked by a female because mentally the person's female. But on the female police officer's side, it may not be in her human rights interest to frisk a guy with a dick. Do you know what I mean?
Well put. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So this is a very tricky issue, and this is something that we need to address in our detention cells.
There needs to be a procedure both for the
Yes.
offender
Yeah.
or the accused,
Yes.
not necessarily the offender, the accused, and for the police officers involved.
Yeah. I think it's a fun brain tickler. I mean, really, like, I thought about it. I was like, wow. I mean, if I was the detention watch commander, like, what would I do?
When you wrote a report, did you have to include an opinion?
No, I just said that there is this problem, and there's going to be more of it in the future, so we need to address it. No opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was not in your place to have suggested
Yeah,
anything, right?
I don't think it was considered very seriously.
Okay. That's very unfortunate because crime is crime, right? Okay. Something for our military listeners, our American military listeners. How are penalties different if you're a member of the American military? Because there's the status of forces agreement, but increasingly within the political climate, there's a lot of backlash from the Korean public as well.
Just to go over the status of forces agreement with the listeners, I think the most important part to know about the status of forces agreement is that if you commit a crime during official duty or official duty hours, then the Korean court does not have jurisdiction over you. You will not be tried in Korean court.
The majority of these crimes happen outside when you're out.
Yeah,
about
then
town.
the Korean court will have jurisdiction over you. But if you are a civil personnel, even if we do have judicial jurisdiction over you, there's all kinds of limits to how the Korean investigative authorities can investigate you. For instance, you need to have like a representative of the U.S. military when you're being interrogated. If the person, a civil personnel, runs back into the U.S. Military installation, then the Korean police may be limited from pursuing the person of interest. So there are a lot of these limits. If you are ever tried in a Korean court, you'll be given the same penalties. But I think really the question is, whose jurisdiction are you? And sometimes I think when the custody or the court jurisdiction goes over to the U.S. side, it creates fury, and I think the source of that fury was back in 2002 when there were 2 middle school girls who were ran over by,
I remember that.
yes, U.S. armored vehicles, and it generated a lot of emotions.
Yeah,
and that was
rightfully so.
Yeah, and that was in tandem with the World Cup. That was when our nationalism was at its pinnacle.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of emotions. It's kind of like etched into our national memory now.
And incidents like that, they need to be prevented ideally, but we need to know what happens to people because if it was negligence, and I understand it was negligence on the job that led to that, right?
I think the perpetrator eventually walked. Yeah.
They walked. They got away. We're coming to the closing here. Lastly, are there any other differences between Western laws and procedure, something that our listeners might be used to, and Korean laws that you think we should be aware of that we haven't already discussed?
Previously, I mentioned that the Korean criminal law comes from a European civil law system, or that from that legal tradition. I think the salient feature of this tradition is that we have many regulations, whereas in the English common law system, that would mean the US, the UK, and the Commonwealth countries. You tend to have less regulations, but they're very strictly enforced. I think that's the main difference. You may think that in Korea, when you come to Korea, is that, you may feel like the law is telling you, oh, don't do this, don't do that, but it's not so bad. Just resort to common sense is what I can tell you. I did want to give you a couple of tips. The first tip is always carry your ID. You're going to be given an alien registration card if you are staying here for more than, I think, 90 days.
That's right.
Yeah.
For most countries.
Yeah. Or if you are staying here less than 90 days, your passport would be your ID. You need to always have your ID. The police can arrest you for not having your ID. That's a crime under Immigration Control Act. That's a fine not exceeding 1 million won. Always have your ID. Second of all, if you're ever a victim in a crime, and if your visa has expired, please do take into consideration that there is a way for you to receive police assistance for certain crimes, not all crimes. But if you're a victim of certain crimes, for instance, assaults, severe injury, robbery, I don't remember all the crimes, but these are some of the examples from which you may be immune from being notified to the immigration authorities. If you're ever victimized in a crime and if your visa is expired, don't be afraid to approach the police. They will help you. Or if you don't feel comfortable approaching the police, then talk to a Korean friend. Make sure that they look into this policy for you, and you can request police assistance.
Very comforting to hear, but we do not encourage overstaying your visa or breaking immigration laws, things like that.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this particular episode. Mr. Moon, once again, not his real name. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me.
If you have any questions or something to debate, something you want to get off your chest, some feedback, let us know in the comments. Coming up in the future, I will be doing the second edition of the Sex in Korea podcast. So if you have something that you want to discuss, go ahead and actually hit me up on my Facebook page. You can send a private message if you don't want your questions on blast. You can write on Facebook wall. In the future, I would like to do a follow-up to this podcast, not necessarily with my guest, Mr. Moon, today, but a specialist, especially because last summer, if you were in Korea, you might recall that people were calling it the summer of feminism in Korea, more like the summer of, I guess, spotlight on misogyny with the Gangnam murder and the sexual assaults and rape of several foreign women. I would like to talk about sex crimes and how they're dealt with, because all of those crimes kind of brought to light some inadequacies, perceived inadequacies in how law handles these terrible, terrible situations. But once again, we need a specialist on that. And if you know someone who can talk to us about that, please send me a message. Otherwise, until next time, this is GP, and you've been listening to the G1 Podcast.
이번 역은 4다.